Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sarah Pentecost, and I'm with APA Virginia staff. Thank you for joining us for our monthly webinar series, Your Hour with APA Virginia, sponsored by the Berkeley Group. Thank you to Darren Coffey, who I believe is on this webinar, and Drew for making this happen. And we've had a pretty successful year with GoToWebinar, and I'm excited to continue it in 2019. And if anyone is interested in presenting a webinar, please contact me or someone in the chapter. I can be reached at info@apavirginia.org. It's probably the easiest way to reach me or the chapter. Let's see who we have with us today. I see some of our board members. Shout out to Allison Eubank for joining us today. Alrighty. Shout out to my mom for joining us today. Hi, Mom. Alrighty. So as you can see here on the screen, our annual conference is coming up in summer 2019. The theme this year is resilience, and the RFP is open through July 25th. We'd love to have you present with us in Hampton. We have different presentation formats that you can look into. And we get all the sessions certified for CM credits. Again, that's available through January 25th. And if you're an APA Virginia member, be sure to check your email for the newsletters that come out periodically for the latest updates on the conference and everything else going on with the chapter. For those who just signed on, thank you for joining us for our monthly webinar series, Your Hour with APA Virginia, sponsored by the Berkeley Group. These webinars are the fourth Monday of each month from noon to 1 p.m., covering many topics in the planning field. And I apologize, CM credit info is not quite available for this webinar. It will be ready tomorrow. So I will send out the follow-up newsletter to this webinar tomorrow when that CM credit is available, so you can log it. So be on the lookout for that. And mark your calendars for next month's webinar on January 28th. We'll have Lorna Parkins with Michael Baker International. They're one of the chapter's annual sponsors, and we're excited to have them in 2019. And that webinar is called Planning for Uncertainty, Exploratory Scenario Planning. Talking about how long-range planning is tricky and it's hard to plan for things ahead when transportation and housing trends are changing. So check out this webinar to learn how to do exploratory scenario planning. And today, we have folks with us from the City of Alexandria's PARKnership Program. For this session, city staff will be joined by two FY17 matching fund recipients. So we have from Alexandria, Dana Wedeles. She is an AICP and principal planner with the City of Alexandria. Ann Tran, she is a senior associate at Little and also, I believe, representing the City of Alexandria. And then we have Abbey Oklak, AICP. She's an urban and architectural designer with national firm Cooper Carey in the Alexandria office, and Kevin Beekman, who is an economist living in Alexandria. His work focuses on travel and transportation forecasting. He is with 4 Mile Run. He is with 4 Mile Run Conservatory Foundation. So I'm now going to hand it over to them so we can get started. Again, thank you so much for being with us today. And I'm now going to hand it over to Dana.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. And just to check, you can see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, so, yes, okay. As Sarah mentioned, I'm Dana Wedeles. I'm with the City of Alexandria and work on park planning projects and how to improve existing open space, acquire open space, and also oversee the PARKnership Program, which is what we'll be talking about today. And just briefly, it's the program that manages partnerships, sponsors, volunteers, and donations that supplement our city budget and city program of capital projects and programs. And then Kevin and Abby and Anne will talk a little bit about the projects that they have partnered with us on after I give some background on the program and on the city. So first I'll just go over what the PARKnership Program is and how it came to be. We'll then go through what the Community Matching Fund is, which is pretty unique to our jurisdiction. And then Kevin will talk about the 4 Mile Run Park Conservatory Foundation, some of their projects and programs, and then Anne and Abby will tag team on the Charles Houston Teen Center and how we got that built. And we'll leave some time at the end for some questions. So City of Alexandria, we are in Northern Virginia, just outside of Washington, D.C. So DC is just north of here. Here's Arlington, and Fairfax is surrounding us on the west and the south. We are a jurisdiction of 150,000 in 15 square miles. That makes us one of the densest cities in the country, even though we're a fairly mid-sized city. People don't think about Alexandria as being as dense as it is just because of its population size. But if you just think in terms of density, we're up there with Philadelphia, and Berkeley, California would be comparable. And that makes it pretty challenging in terms of land use. We have a ratio of about 7.3 acres of publicly accessible open space per 1,000 residents. And that means that we have to really program our open space in a very efficient, effective way that reflects the community and is really taking advantage of the space that we have. And as I talk, you'll hear how PARKnership has helped us really take advantage of our open spaces. I have starred here where 4 Mile Run Park is because we'll be talking about that location later on in the presentation, and then the Charles Houston Recreation Center, just to give you a little sense of where we are and what we're talking about. So a little bit about our department. We're a park planning division within the Recreation, Parks, and Cultural Activities Department. Our mission is to enrich the city of Alexandria by creating meaningful experiences through public space, cultural activities, and programming. And when we developed this mission statement about, I guess, 18 months ago, we really stressed the words meaningful experiences. I like to start out public meetings by asking folks to think about their favorite memory in a park or a recreation facility. Because most people have really positive memories of that as a child, and that's what we're trying to create throughout life, are those experiences that you really hold on to and happened in, while playing in a stream or at an after-school program in a rec center or, attending a farmer's market. So just think about that as we're going through and how important those spaces have been throughout your life. And then our vision is that we'll improve the well-being of every person in our community by connecting them to each other and their environment. And this is particularly important when it comes to the PARKnership Program. One of our main goals as a department is to connect people to each other in our facilities. And why that's so particularly important for PARKnership is we're trying to really break down some of the bureaucracy between government and community organizations and spark creativity between those two and make things happen. The red tape, the bureaucracy is still there, but how can we really humanize the partnerships between government and community organizations? And so that's a main part of our vision for the future of the department. So a little background on the PARKnership Program. Prior to 2016, our department did work with volunteers. We had partnerships. We worked with sponsors. We had an Adopt a Bench program. But really, it was more of a reactionary approach rather than going out and seeking organizations to partner with. We were limited in our staff resources. It was, who can address this when, not really somebody dedicated just to working with partners. And as I said, we're a very dense city and our resources are pretty limited. And we just didn't have the funding to support the level of involvement that the community was seeking. So that started to change around 2011, 2012, when we had a real increase in community organizations that wanted to partner with us. And Kevin will talk to that a little bit more later on. He was one of the groups that was our initial, had an initial interest in partnering with us. But the one that I'll focus on right now, you see images on the right of the Kelly Cares Miracle Field. And the Miracle Field is, the Miracle Field is a field specifically designed for both children and adults with disabilities, whether they be in wheelchairs or just unsteady on their feet. It's a smooth surface and it's an opportunity for everybody to play a sport. So the construction for this, the funding for design and construction was 10 years out in our capital improvement plan, and it was supposed to be entirely planned by the city and paid for by the city, but not for 10 years. So at the time it was 2011, it wouldn't have been built until 2021. And a group of organized residents came together and they said to City Council, we can't wait that long. What if we fundraise half of it and you give half the money and we'll get it done next year? City Council said, we'll take the chance. You go out, see if you can fundraise the money. The total budget was about $450,000. You fundraise half of it, we'll match you, and we'll get this done next year. They were incredibly successful. The site was built within the next year. And what I like to say is that the city could have waited 10 years. We could have done the field then. But by having this organization partner with us, they put the heart and the soul into the site, and it just really took on a life of its own because of them. They became the stewards of the park and the program, and all the volunteers that work there on the site every week. So the partnership really created stewardship to the programs and the projects. It gave confidence between city staff and community groups. It let the barrier down between bureaucracy and we're real people working in city government. Yes, the process can be frustrating at times on both sides, but it really helped develop that confidence and also clearly made an impact decision from a city council perspective. So using that as an example, and for Model Run Park Conservatory as an example, the department decided to formalize the partnership program in 2016, and we created the partnership division. And partnership, to give you a background, was a typo. It started as partnership on a memo, and or it was supposed to be partnership on a memo, and it was written as partnership, and we just liked it and stuck. So it coordinates and cultivates the community partnerships, volunteers, and donations and other support under one umbrella. Also the community matching fund, which I'll speak to in a moment. And let's see if we can get this. I'm gonna show you a quick video because I can talk about it all day, but it's more important to hear from some of our partners and what they do. I'm going to switch the screen over to Sarah to show the video real quick. Does that work?
Yes. All right. Let me.
Okay.
Alrighty.
There we go.
It's really how our communities only improve when we do, our bit. And it's easy and it's fun. And you can make a big difference. For many, many years, Rebuilding Together has had volunteers
come into this neighborhood here in Hume Springs and provide the free home repairs to the homeowners. And it's only a natural extension of ours to do community work. So cool to see that some people never came to the park, and now folks are coming on a daily basis just because of the rehab.
My motivation for helping kids and families in Alexandria is simple. I live here. I want to help kids and families in the place where I live. You know, it makes sense to me to make sure that our kids and families have what they need to be successful.
The city gave us a great opportunity to service girls who were in need of mentoring, and that's what we're here to do. We mentor young girls from grades 3 through 6 in cultural activities, educational activities, and social activities, all to broaden their horizons on their society and the world around them. What I hope to see is a long-term result of the partnership is seeing young ladies thrive, go on to college and be successful citizens and productive citizens of this state, of this country, of this city of Alexandria.
A bunch of us got together from the community, and we tried to figure out a way we could work with the city, parks, recreation, and cultural activities, and the Delray Business Association to form a partnership whereby we could raise funds with a lot of the community members and also business owners, and then the city would provide matching funds so we could do park improvements. I think it's a partnership because what we're trying to do is show that we have like a vested interest in this. Part of that vested interest is not only raising money, but also devoting time, volunteer work, that kind of thing. So part of this is like stewardship and ownership, and I think that's what's key, working with the city and the community to get things done. It's easy to sit around and talk about what you want the city to do or demand things, but you got to back up your words with action. And I think that's what the Simpson Park Dog Owners Group does in partnership with the Business Association and the city. So we appreciate that, and we look forward to more work ahead.
Okay, and Sarah, if you want to switch it back to me. Okay. So in that first year that we started the partnership program, we hired a partnership manager whose job is dedicated just towards this work. We recorded 377 volunteers performing over 16,000 hours of service. And what's one thing I just want to point out here, I'll come up later, is that in the Commonwealth of Virginia, 1 hour of volunteer service is considered $26. That's set out by the state, and $26 seems a bit high for some volunteers, but it's really an average if you think about, you have your Girl Scout troop all the way up to, somebody volunteering their time with a huge expertise on a particular subject. So they average it out to about $26 an hour. And I'll talk about why that's important when we discuss the community matching fund in a moment. In that inaugural year, we created 28 new partnerships. And that equaled about $210,000, and that's to supplement our city budget. This past year, that was over $300,000. And then we established the community matching fund. And since we established that in 2016, we've had 15 new projects, and I'll focus a little bit more on what that means. So I really want to talk about the matching fund because I think other jurisdictions have partnership programs. There are park conservancies out there, there are volunteer programs out there, but I think what really sets us apart and makes us unique is this community matching fund program. So as you heard earlier, the Miracle Field group said to council, what if we split it? And there wasn't really a mechanism at the time for providing matching funds. Council said sure, and they moved at the money, but that didn't really help other organizations that wanted to do the same. In the video, you saw Paul from the Simpson Dog Park Group also mention splitting funds. That was another organization where we split, I think the total was $28,000. We split them, the funding, they fundraised and we matched in order to put lights in a dog park. And again, we didn't really have a mechanism. We were kind of making it up as we went along. So the community matching fund was a way to formalize a process in providing matching funds for organizations who have ideas on how to improve our parks, and they have the capacity to either fundraise or to provide volunteer hours that count towards that fundraised amount. So that goes back to what I was mentioning about the volunteer hours equaling $26. In our budget, every year we now have $100,000 set aside for matching fund projects. The matching fund can be in an amount up to $25,000. So the city provides up to $25,000, and then the group provides up to $25,000, and that includes their sweat equity if they choose to go about that route. And so it really promotes collaborative partnerships with city organizations and gives us the mechanism to pursue these projects without kind of making it up as we go along, which is what we had been doing. It is a competitive process, and there's a cycle to it. Every February, the competition opens up and community organizations can apply. And this past year, we got 10 applications, and we were only able to accept 6 out of those 10, and wish that we could have done all of them. But this is the first year where we really did have to turn groups away because it's becoming so popular to apply, and there are many projects out there that that would be great partners. The applications are reviewed internally, and they're also reviewed and then approved by our Park and Recreation Commission. They have to show that they would provide a public benefit. They have to be on a city-owned property, so it can't be a private property with a public easement. It has to be something the city owns. And it has to show that it supports our mission and be initiated, planned, and implemented by the neighbors and the community members that would be impacted by the project. And both Anne, Abby, and Kevin are going to talk about their community matching fund projects, but just before we switch over to them, some other ones that we've done recently to give you an idea of the diversity of these projects. Here's 4 examples. The first one being Compost Alex. This was a project to install compost bins in 2 of our parks to process food waste on site. Both of those sites are at farmers markets where people were bringing their compost to begin with, and now there are actual bins on the, at the parks. Little League, this is a project to install scoreboards, and this is a project that they had been wanting to do for quite some time, and it was hard to get dedicated city funds for really a project that benefits such a small group of people that are in the Little League. So the Community Matching Fund was a great way to meet that need for a small group of folks. The Lee Center Playground, this will be a playground or retrofitting an existing playground so that it has more therapeutic recreational use. It's near the Miracle Field, so we already have a program, and this will include sensory areas, quiet areas, and more equipment for wheelchairs. And then lastly is a project where we have a closed swimming pool that's been sitting there with a chain link fence around it, and we're going to construct a deck over that pool so it can become a community plaza. I think what's so great about the Community Matching Fund, and you'll hear more about it in a minute, is the diversity of projects and the creativity of these projects. Some of these were just not on our radar. And the community brings a whole new perspective and new ideas. The compost one, as an example, was just not something we were planning for and really should have been thinking about. And this was an opportunity to, as I've said before, break down that barrier between the local government process and the community organization and get something done that really benefits a lot of people. So I'm going to switch the mouse over to Kevin. Kevin, I think you actually already have. Yep. Okay. To talk about the 4 Mile Run Park Conservatory Foundation.
Oh, okay, I got it. How do I go back? 1 second. Do you
want me to get you back?
Yes, please, because I can't find the controls. Thank you.
Okay, there you go.
All right, thank you. All right, yes, I'm Kevin Beekman with the 4 Mile Run Conservatory Foundation. It's something that we founded in 2016. Me, along with Coach Moser, who's our foundation president. Basically, we're a friend of the park group, but also a friend of the stream. 4 Mile Run is the stream that divides Alexandria and Arlington. There's actually a 4 Mile Run park on both sides of the stream near us in the Alexandria neighborhood. And we're pretty much dedicated to making improvements and working in both those parks and along the stream. What I'm going to talk about here is basically how the foundation was formed in a couple of broad examples. And I think that these are basically the story of how partnerships came about in Alexandria. But first I have to talk about a little bit of the background. You might wonder why we're talking about something that happened 45 or 50 years ago. It seems like it's something that's necessary when we're talking about anything in the Alexandria neighborhood to talk about the floods, the flooding of 4 Mile Run, and what happened subsequent to that. It's something that's mentioned if you're familiar with the Foo Fighters songs about Alexandria. It's there's a line in there. Don't you remember? It was the rain that drowned you. This is the flood from the late 60s and early 70s. The two pictures that I'm showing here are one is Mount Vernon Avenue, or the business district. It's a fire that was the result of the flood. There's a gas station whose gasoline floated out of the pumps and caught fire and destroyed a row of businesses, which have never been restored. That's still basically a vacant lot even today. And the bottom picture is basically you're looking at 4 Mile Run and 4 Mile Run Park as it flooded a good part of the neighborhood. The neighborhood at the bottom of that picture, the little half circle, is the Hume Springs neighborhood. Was just talked about in the video. The playground project that was in that video is in the Hume Springs neighborhood, and a lot of the work that we've done are around that neighborhood still. What happened subsequent to this flooding was a project to keep the run from flooding, and what's happened in the last 20 years or so where it was an effort to restore some of the excesses of that flood project to try to make it more livable. Starting around about 20 years ago in 1998, which is actually when I came into the story. Citizens in the neighborhood and around the park were asking for city leadership to begin two processes that were kind of separate at the beginning to address issues in the commercial district and then around the stream. One was the 2003 Alexandria plan and the 2005 4 Mile Run restoration plan. Both of those called for acquiring commercial properties to expand the park and to connect it to the neighborhood, and kind of restore the stream to both enhance recreation but maintain the flood control project. But what happened subsequent to that was the 2008 crash, which really led us into several years of budget austerity, which I think we're just about coming out of. But nevertheless, there was a desire from the folks in the neighborhood to try to get things happening. And there was actually something in 2005 that some of us came up with, which was just a citizen action plan. Maybe some of that never came about, but there were two lines in that I wanted to pull out, and those were work within the neighborhood to determine achievable public space improvements and establish a vehicle to receive grants towards improvements. We had that idea 13 years ago. Okay. The first of the few projects that we worked on was a project called 3550 Commonwealth Avenue. It was a former electrical substation that was owned by Dominion Power that had been decommissioned, and the city had at that time an open space plan. Oh, I'm sorry, open space fund to acquire properties to expand open space. But with the acquisition of that open space, there wasn't funds at the time to do any kind of real restorations, try to make it into a park, or even plan where the park would be. Just a bunch of neighbors came together to start to at least do some small projects, try to plant a garden there, take down some of the screening trees that had been there to hide the electrical substation, but were really not conducive to really making it into a park, or really anything other than what is essentially a vacant lot. There were volunteer days that followed, and ongoing maintenance from the neighbors. And we saw crime reduction around this, an increased use of the parks, and generally a better increased feeling of well-being, and even some investment in the commercial district nearby. Similarly, there were also funds to expand 4 Mile Run Park on the other side of the neighborhood. The top picture, top right picture, is a picture of some underutilized commercial properties, which are now a park plaza. Again, although there were funds to do some environmental remediation and tear down some of these buildings, it again left us with a vacant lot, and maybe more of a blighted property than what was there before. And there was no funds yet to do anything with it. So a group of architects who also were affected by the 2008 downturn, had some time on their hands, came up with, volunteered a plan to do something in an interim, which is the plan, it's in the middle of the screen, to create a kind of an urban plaza. This was also when I think we started to see park staff and city staff try to come up with creative solutions to move us forward. They helped us organize volunteer days. The bottom right picture is a volunteer day with some businesses to start rehabbing one of the buildings to make it into a community building. And the bottom picture on the bottom left is actually city staff volunteering to help rehab the outside of the building and paint the outside of the building. And with the plaza, trying to move that plan forward, some of us founded a farmer's market, which involved starting to clear the vacant lot. The picture on the top right is a couple of days of us trying to make the vacant lot habitable for a farmer's market. It helped us focus attention again this plaza built, which it eventually did, and allowed us to institute a program to serve SNAP customers at a farmer's market, which was the first time in Northern Virginia, and I think just the third time in Virginia where it was done. But starting a farmer's market came with ongoing volunteer obligations. It was a whole lot of effort going through a planning process, working with the health department, and then after the fact, working with the Parks Department to hash out what exactly the obligations were and responsibilities. It was almost like volunteering led to more volunteering, a little bit more work than we anticipated, because we had to hash all that out as we went along, trying to invent the wheel. But the farmers market also brought together some other things. It helped us. It attracted donations to put a stage in the park, which we've programmed for the last 5 or 6 years, almost every week. There's a farmers market there, and it created a community meeting place in the park, which helped us. We started to create to furnish the park. Created something we called the 4 Mile Run Market Lounge. It became a venue for nonprofits to reach out to folks during the farmers market. We have fundraisers at the farmers market. It's a place for the city staff and city programs to reach out for both planning on city plans and for program activities. And then we also have activities like bike repair, bike rodeos. The plaza also hosts movie nights on other times outside the farmers market. It also kind of helped us focus volunteer efforts. There was an obligation to be there, an obligation to have the farmers market. Brought an obligation of trying to help make improvements to the park, and so we helped the city with maintenance. There was these trees that are on the top right picture. They had to be maintained, had to be watered over the first couple of years. That became a citizen project. And additional tree plantings. We started to partner with other organizations like KC Trees to plant at what were the first couple dozen trees. I think we're now up to 12 dozen trees that we planted. And that led us to, I think this was, I think it's in 2009, is that right? We formalized the partnership. We were the pilot for one of the first partnership programs. Like I said, the 4 mile run brought obligations to either contribute to park maintenance or provide a donation. It turns out that we were raising about a little bit of money with the farmers market. So we were trying to not just give that over to the city, but try to find ways to make that useful and find projects that were would have both improved the neighborhood, that were good to get a good bang for the buck. And so we decided to do both, try to have a volunteer day of additional plantings, but also try to fund it. So we worked with RPCA to establish what I think was the first partnership, where we set out a memorandum of understanding at the get-go, trying what the obligations were and how to do this, you know, in more of a partnership than in the past. It also allowed us to leverage funds. We took what little money we had from the farmers market and attracted additional donations from the public, and then partnered that with grants from, well, a grant in this case with Dominion Power, and we planted 3 dozen trees. This happens to be along the edge of the park that was in the picture earlier with the flooding, where the stream had come up. And so this is right behind the homes at the edge of the park. And that led us to found the 4 Mile Run Conservatory Foundation, establish a nonprofit. The big thing in establishing a nonprofit was really creating a mission statement. We spun our wheels for this for a long time, but it's basically where we landed was just to support the implementation of the park plans. And having the park plans in place really helped us figure out what it actually is we can pursue. We use startup funds, again, from the farmers market. We use those funds in subsequent years to the last planning that we raised to pay for the to establish the farmers market, all the legal requirements to establish a 501c3. We focus on 3 areas of focus, basically litter abatement, park improvements, and citizen engagement and citizen science. With grant support, we've done a series of partnerships programs, ongoing programs with the city, with something called Clean Stream Extreme, where we got grant funding to get equipment to support and promote park and stream cleanups. We had found that we kind of reached the end of what we could do with just everyday park cleanups, and we had to get additional equipment. Some of it was like boots and waders to get into the stream and get to places that we couldn't get to before. That led us to acquire some kayaks with the additional grants to do kayak cleanups on the stream. We host walks of the park and stream, focusing on history, wildlife, and some of the green infrastructure that's been put in place. We also have talks that aren't in the park, but the walks are actually a lot more popular. One of the things we did with the stream restoration, we wanted to document the wildlife coming back. So we've infrared trail cameras and crowdsource observations of wildlife through things like iNaturalist and doing bird and frog counts. We've done vine pulls, invasive vine pulls, and we also tried to find a way to make that fun and creative, and actually had an artist on hand to figure out if we could do some weavings with it. And more tree plantings, like I said, about 12 dozen, including a food forest, a stand of trees which were not just native, but also produced edible nuts and fruits. And the last on this list is the Kick the Habit project, which is installing water bottle fillers, which was our community matching fund project. The idea here was to try to find a way to reduce litter in the parks. Primarily, litter was coming from plastic water bottles, disposable plastic water bottles. And we thought we'd try to see if installing water bottle filler stations in parks would reduce that the amount of or the need for disposable water bottles, plastic water bottles. And we identified 3 locations that we thought needed litter abatement, and applied for the matching grant. We talked to the Soccer Association. It was primarily around a few soccer fields. A couple of them were not in Fort Mile Run Park, where we were dedicated to most of our work, but it was easier to convert existing water fountains to water bottle fillers, and we have a couple of examples in that picture. Not all these are in projects that we worked on, but these are examples of the kind of thing that we were trying to get into parks. We solicited funds from the public for this through Giving Tuesday, right after Thanksgiving, and a local fundraising activity in the spring called Spring to Action. And through that, we leveraged with the other matching funds. Eventually, it became a 4-to-1. So basically, for the amount of money that we put up, we doubled it with, with the amount of money that we raised from crowdfunding, we were able to match that with grants, and then the city doubled that with the community matching fund. And so it's basically a 4-to-1 ratio from what we were able to raise. And so we had the first of 2 water stations installed, and they were both installed under budget. Park staff RPCA has found funds for a 3rd one, which was recently installed. We had applied for that in our matching grant, but it was a little bit too complicated to really do as an outside organization. It involved installing a water line. But I think with this, we've established a city standard for trying to get water bottle filler stations in city parks. And we even have we have ongoing efforts to try to promote the use of the water bottle filler stations. We have leftover funds from the fundraising to do that with. And the next ongoing partnership, one of the things we're trying to do next, and we applied for a community matching fund grant for this, but weren't awarded it, was to expand on the popularity of our kayak cleanups. And so we have a couple launches in Fort Mile Run Park, one which is accessible at low tide, and one that isn't. Where the low tide launch, we were looking to expand and get a water access launch there, which is the idea is to try to do something in that, like the one seen in the bottom picture. We have grants out to try to get additional boats and additional storage But to really get into the water and allow other folks to get into the water, we wanted to fix up what you see on the left-hand side, which is the existing boat launch, which seems to be popular to launch shopping carts from. So that was a bigger project though than the community matching fund really could do, and so we're still working with staff to find other funding sources for that. And I just wanted to close by talking about this scene. I think the graphic at the bottom left, I don't think you really got to see at the beginning. It's actually the cover for this presentation. It's the graphic that represents Alexandria partnerships. It's kind of an idealized version of what all you can do in under these partnerships. When I think I was maybe a little bit even involved in reviewing that graphic when it came out, but it was something that when we put together, I didn't really think of as something. I don't see that as 4 Mile Run Park until I saw this picture that I found on Flickr one day, which is 4 Mile Run Park from the restored 4 Mile Run stream and wetlands, looking toward the sun setting. And it's the playground, it's the trail, people on the trail biking and walking. Just beyond the trees is the soccer fields, and plaza where we have the farmers market. Just to the left is a futsal field that other folks have rehabbed with through the C partnerships and a matching grant fund. There's the water bottle filler station. This encompasses everything that we were trying to do in partnerships, just I think in this one picture, and I thought it really spoke to it. And I do have to say that we don't usually end a presentation about our land area without having either a setting sun or a rising sun or a rainbow. It's just something that happens because it's conducive there, but it's also, I think, the other Foo Fighters song that we always talk about in our land area, Headwires, which has the lyric, the sun is on our land area. So I'm sending this back to Dana, I think, to introduce the next section.
Yes, and I'm actually going to send it over to Abby and Anne. Let me just give, Anne, you should have access to the keyboard.
Yes, I do. Although, is there the previous slide, our little intro slide in here?
This is the first one I've got.
Oh, okay, cool. Well, if we can just stick it back to that one. Hey guys, so I'm Anh Tran, and Abbey Oklak will be my co-presenter. We are the board members for the Braddock Metro Civic Association, well, Citizens Coalition, but we're the civic association for our area. We are both architects, and we are, it's kind of interesting because Kevin was talking about sort of an ongoing relationship with the PARKnership program, whereas we had more of a, so far, single-use project with the partnership. Not discounting the possibility of future partnerships, but we were brought in as volunteers to work with the Charles Houston Recreation Center's Advisory Council for a new project that they were attempting to do at the rec center for a teen center. I'm sure you guys are all aware that as urban spaces increasingly densify, a lot of these public spaces that are open spaces don't really serve teenagers necessarily the same way, right? There's been an increasing movement away from teenagers in open space. I'm sure you guys all know about the issues with teenagers in playgrounds and how they just don't seem as available to them anymore. So we were really excited to be able to work with the Teen Center and the Department of Parks and Recreation to create a new space. So to give you some context, oops, sorry, go ahead.
One more important thing, this is Abby, is I think it's important to mention that this is the first interior partnership project. And so we had a lot of issues and things that we kind of dealt with as being an interior space. We'll talk about that a little bit more, but everything from building permits and labor and all of that stuff, because we did need trades versus just having volunteers do a lot of our work. But I think that that's kind of what makes this so special, is that we were able to take a room that was underutilized and create something new for the community.
Yep. And to give you guys some context, we were brought on after the fundraising and the community matching fund agreement had already been established. So at the time, the president of the advisory council had submitted an application to the department And basically they had committed to raising $25,000 in matching funds to be matched by the city. And then they were going to try to raise over top of that. The goal was to be able to fund the construction and design of the new space, but also hopefully leave behind a certain amount of money that could be used to program the space, because it's not necessary. It's not just that space can just offer a civic good, right? It also needs a certain amount of programming and interaction and working as a platform. So at the time that the project started, when Abbey and I were brought in, they had raised, all told, including the matching fund, about $76,000, which included a contribution from Rebuilding Together, who has been a great partner on many of these projects, and they had committed to $15,000 and volunteer labor coordination. So with all of these stipulations in mind, we started to work on designing the project with the community and with community involvement. And we also knew that with all of these stakeholders, the city, Rebuilding Together, the advisory council, the various contractors and labor that were going to come in, and the intended delivery date, which I think was, Abbey, correct me if I'm wrong, about 6 months after we started?
Correct, yeah.
That we were going to have to control for a lot of interaction, and that was going to affect our schedule and process fairly significantly. So what you can see before you is the original space, which is a perfectly pleasant space. It's just not really programmed for anything, right? It's fairly blank. The idea of flexibility was obviously present in the creation of the room, but it just doesn't have anything that particularly speaks to teenagers. So Abbey, would you like to speak about the process we underwent?
Yeah, so again, as Anne mentioned, this was really a new program at the rec center. So there wasn't a whole lot of ideas about what the programming was going to be. So we kind of helped frame both what the design of the space was going to be, as well as kind of what they needed in order to implement it. So Anne and I are both people who have done a lot of visioning in our lifetime, me as a planner and as an interior architect. And so we took our experiences and we brought this to the process here. And so what we did is we had 3 visioning sessions, of which here you can see the pictures from all of the different events that we had. So we had one with the teenagers, which are the 2 images on the top. The one on the bottom left is with the programs committee. And so that was everyone from city staff to the volunteers who had already committed to be a part of programming activities. And then the middle is where we had all of the maintenance folks from the operations folks from the city who kind of are going to be in charge of cleaning and all of that kind of stuff to make sure that we were on target with what we were doing. So we did 3 activities, we did 4 activities. One which was pie in the sky. What would you want here if you had an unlimited budget and schedule? A day in the life. What are things that would happen at different times of day in the room? And that you can see an example of one of those charts in the bottom right. So we were thinking about what would happen during the school year, what would happen during the summer, both in the morning, the afternoon, and the evening. And so obviously those things are different depending on what's going on with the teenagers' lives. We also did Crystal Ball, which was imagine the project is complete and successful. What does it look like? And then finally, we did mood boards, which is what you can see in the 3 images on the left, where we had example images that we had found as a design team to basically give inspiration and see what resonated. It was really interesting to see the results of all of these because the teenagers, the operations folks, and the program folks basically all came up with the same ideas. And so it was then up to us to kind of accumulate it into a final plan and start to move forward.
Yeah, and that was very important because I think there was a lot of concern between the different stakeholder groups that there wasn't going to be a lot of intersection, and it turned out there was, which helped to smooth the way towards a collaborative process between all of the groups involved. So let me move on to the next slide. Whoop, there you go. So we came up with a rough idea of what we thought the space should be like. We thought that it could be zoned to serve different activities and also be flexible, that the island that you can see in the front of this rendering is designed to be the only stationary part of the room. So that there's kind of a home base for activities. It's powered so that people can charge their cell phones and laptops there. But it was very important to us that everybody who was involved in the project feel that this design resonated with them. You know, we were trying to make sure that the space was vibrant without being childish, but also could serve the kinds of different things that teenagers want to do in a space. And also hopefully potentially serve as an alternative space for a lot of the activities that the Recreation Center currently hosts. So we made a lot of effort to make sure that we were speaking to the teens through the phases of the design, as we came with the schematics, as we came up with the finishes, and that we talked to programs and operations to make sure that they felt that these spaces were things that they could work with. So part of this project, which we were talking about earlier, was that we needed to coordinate with a lot of volunteers. So to give you guys some context for how much effort went into this, over top of the $76,000 that was actually monetarily raised, we probably generated another $55,000 to $65,000 worth of effort, of volunteer effort, and materials and donated labor. So one of the stipulations for Rebuilding Together's participation was that we needed to be prepared to have 2 days of volunteer effort in September, which involved 60 volunteers doing 8 different tasks. So you can start to see the scope of that in these photos. We had a team of 20 building custom millwork benches for the wall closest to the window. We had 10 people doing the painting of the walls and building the slats for the little proscenium stage that we were theoretically putting inside of it. There was just a lot of work that went into this, and this was part of the Partnerships Commission, right, is to get groups that had not worked together but were dedicated to the city to work together to do great things, and we thought that this part of it was particularly successful. So this is kind of the finished space, not kind of, but it is. So you can see all of the different components that went into this, and the first image that you can see right there, those graffiti panels were actually produced by the teens. So the teens there is a group at the Recreation Center that is led by a bunch of teenagers who work as peer mentors to other people in their peer groups. They're resources to teenagers outside their particular community, pretty much across the city. And those teens came together to make a piece of art that could be in the room so they could all be committed to it. You can see these different zones that we put in. There's an area for gaming, there's study areas, there's a little beanbag area. They can move that apart, they can put in speakers, they can do shows, they can do poetry slams. They've actually done several activities in there so far, including the Teen Titan Takeover, the TC Titan Takeover, Teen Titans, pretty close. And they've basically made this space their own. Let me move this one. So this is an overall image of basically what you can see. There's just a lot of different opportunity for them. And we thought that this was an amazing use of the partnership funding. However, we did have a bunch of lessons learned from the process, and Abby, if you'd like to fill in on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the big lessons learned that we had is because it was an interior project, we still had to deal with the building process. And so we had to go through all the permits and all of that stuff, but it was a city building. And so as volunteer labor and going through the city process to kind of expedite the system, I think there could have been a little bit more communication between the permit office and city staff, as well as our team, to kind of do it. I mean, we got it, we opened, I think, 2 months after we really wanted to, in November versus in late September. But I think everything that came together, we got it working, but it was just kind of, we were doing it on a budget and trying to get in people's windows when we could for their volunteer hours, as well as free labor. So I think that was kind of the biggest trial is organizing the schedule of when folks would be there to do the lighting and when we could get on all of that stuff. And Ann knows a little bit more about the budget and the procurement process, but I think that was also an issue. But in the end of the day, I think everyone was willing to get there. And so if they're in the future, the lessons learned from this could be to make the process a little bit more streamlined.
Yeah, because we did run into, just as from our perspective as a volunteer organization coming in to help, it was, and I know that Dana can probably chime in on some of the refinements that have been made to the process for this, but there was some question about procurement, right? Because knowing that this was a city project, at first a lot of the procurement had to go through the city for approval even for the matching fund. So there was a little bit of a complication in determining how we were going to pay for components in terms of who was authorized to approve the funding. So anything that came from Rebuilding Together or that the advisory council had fundraised, we had a fair amount of flexibility with. But with the city, we needed to make sure we were communicating really well with Dana to give her a heads up that this invoice was coming and we needed to approve this purchase and what POs did we need to do, and to make sure that we had the city process down as well.
And this is Dana again. Yes, there were a lot of lessons learned through this, and procurement being one of the stickier points that we've had to tweak the process a bit. And both Kick the Habit and Charles Houston were in our first year of the community matching fund. So each year I think we've gotten a little bit better. It is particularly challenging with dealing with facilities. This still is the first facility that we've done through the matching fund, and really hope that we do more of them, and that all the projects are not just outside. We want to look at all of our public spaces, whether they be interior or exterior, but there's still some kinks to work out, so that it's a smoother process going forward. And I also just want to say that this last picture is great, and it showcases everything that they did. And when you go to the site now, it is jammed packed. Every one of these seats are full, and it's just incredible to see the difference between and the evolution of the space from that empty room you saw at the beginning to what you're seeing here, and now what I see when I go just on any given night, and how filled it is with people, kids coming in and out. So it's really been transformative, and we have so much thanks to give to our volunteers, Abby and Ann, and then also going back to Kevin's presentation and the partners that we've had over the past couple years. So I'm going to just end with our contact information. And I know we're at about 1 o'clock on the dot, but if there are questions, we're happy to stay on and answer. And Sarah, I don't know if there are any closing words you need to provide.
Yeah. Thanks, Dana, and thanks also Kevin, Ann, and Abby for this wonderful webinar. And it's great to see organizations like you all making great communities happen in Virginia, because that's what APA Virginia is all about. And we do have time for questions. If anyone wants to send them in, I will read them out. I'll go ahead and read a comment from Hillary Zom. She says, "It's so nice to see this teen center project." Thank you for that. And I'll wait just a second to see if we have any more come in. Like I said in the beginning, I apologize. The CM credit info is not quite available yet, but it will be tomorrow, and I'll send out the follow-up email to this webinar then with the registration link for January's webinar about long-term planning, scenario planning. And I don't remember if I mentioned this before, but we record all of these webinars and put them on APA Virginia's YouTube channel. You can't get a CM credit for watching retroactively yet, but they're there as a resource for you, and all of our past webinars are there as well. I just got a question from Jeff Hollern asking, who handles project design, and is there a city staff sign-off?
So it varies for each project in terms of the design, and it also really depends on staff capacity. That's probably one of the bigger challenges we have is the projects that come through the partnerships are not predictable. So when we are working on our CIP, we can plan out staff over the next 10 years and what our capacity is. When we have partnership projects, we have to figure out how we're going to either do the design in-house or in the case of the Teen Center, cross our fingers and hope we find awesome designers like Abby and Ann that can volunteer their time to help, which was what they did. And it's also something we consider when we're looking at the community fund or community matching fund applications. Does a project require a lot of design? Is it shelf ready or shovel ready, or do they have somebody that can help with the design, or do we have the staff capacity at that time to take it on? And that's really helped with the planning of having the community matching fund has helped with the planning of these partnerships. And yes, all designs, whether they're done in-house or through a partner, needs to be reviewed and go through a process. If it is typically, if it's under 2,500 square feet, then we can just review it internally. If it's larger than that, it goes through city process, and multiple eyes will see it before it could be signed off on. In the case of the teen center, it also had to go through review by for building permits, and it was a much more formal review process.
And I don't think we're going to have any more questions. So we'll go ahead and wrap it up. Again, thank you everyone for spending your lunch hour with us today, and be on the lookout for the newsletter coming into your inbox tomorrow. Oh, wait, I have one more question, also from Jeff.
Okay.
How did you decide to put multiple small awards versus one large award?
That's a good question, and a lot of it is staff capacity. And what we're able to hold it to handle at that time. Some of the projects just came in smaller. In the first year, we had 4 large projects. This year, we had 2 or 3 large projects, and then 3 smaller ones. And so it really just depends on what applications come in and what we're able to handle. The smaller ones we can typically get done much faster, like the compost bin project. We were just working with one organization that was using volunteer hours. That was a pretty quick one and not terribly complicated. As long as it equals in the end $100,000, then we have a lot of leeway on how we want to divvy it up. And we also, this upcoming year will be the first time that we're going to allow projects that are under a total of 10,000. In the past 3 years, the total, you had to have at least a $10,000 project, with 5,000 coming from the city and 5,000 from that organization. But we've had a lot of interest from even smaller groups that just want to get something quick done in a park and doesn't take a lot of effort. So we're going to lower it to a $5,000 project. So city will contribute $2,500, and then the organization will contribute either a monetary of $2,500 or those volunteer hours that equal $2,500.
Thank you, Dana, and I believe that is it for now. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up. Everyone, enjoy the rest of your Monday, and we will see you in the new year.
Thanks, everyone.